Welcome back to the fourth episode in the Principles of Drum Set series. In this episode, we'll talk about basic drum set notation and reading drum set music in general. So, without further ado, let's head over to the whiteboard and get started. So, to start off, I'd like to talk about clefs. When you think about reading music, you often see these two clefs, the treble clef and the bass clef. And these are the two most common clefs in reading pitched music, which means when you see a note on a staff, it relates to a pitch that's connected to that specific clef. So if this were a reading bass clef, this note would be an A. However, when reading drum set music, we relate to the rhythm clef, which is just two vertical lines like that you see at the beginning of each line of music. And this means that when you write a note on the staff, rather than corresponding to an actual pitch, it relates to a part of the drum set. So that's what we'll talk about next, and how to read drum set notation in general. So to continue with this note head I've already drawn on the staff here, this bottom space of the staff is the kick drum space. So anytime you see a note on the space, you'll play a bass drum note. Notice that it's at the bottom of the staff, much like how the kick drum is at the bottom of the drum set. It's played with our feet, right? To continue with that trend, if you ever see an X right below the staff like that, that is a hi-hat chick, or a hi-hat note played with the pedal of the hi-hat rather than with your hands. And this also brings up another good trend in drum set notation. Whenever you play on a drum, like a kick drum, snare drum, tom-tom, you're going to see, more often than not, a regular note head like this. However, if you play on a cymbal, like a hi-hat or a ride cymbal, for example, you'll usually see an X note head. And that's just a nice reminder to know that you're either going to be playing on a drum when you see regular note heads, or a cymbal when you see an X note head. Next, let's talk about the snare drum. The snare drum is located in the third space up from the bottom of the staff, so right here. And the special thing about the snare drum is that it contradicts the pattern I was just talking about, where all the drums get regular note heads and all the cymbals get X note heads. This is because the snare drum has a couple different variations on note heads, depending on what sound you want to get from the drum. You can have the regular note head, which just means you have to hit the drum head as normal. But you can also have an X with a circle around it, and that usually means a rim shot, or striking the drum head and the rim simultaneously to create a really loud sound that sounds like this. Oddly enough, the other snare drum note head you might see is just an X, much like the cymbals that we were talking about earlier. However, this X, instead of a cymbal, means a cross stick usually. And we've talked about the cross stick in a previous episode, but just as a reminder, this is what it looks like and sounds like. Before moving on to talk about the toms, I'd like to mention that depending on who's writing the music and or depending on what music notation software they're using to write the music, these two symbols, these two note heads right here, sometimes get switched in terms of meaning, so that the X with a circle around it means a cross stick and the X means a rim shot. Now, usually you will see this as a rim shot and this as a cross stick, but just be aware that sometimes they do switch, and that oftentimes the composer will just say cross stick above the staff if they want a cross stick, or a rim shot above the staff if they want a rim shot. Now, let's talk about the toms. Like I said in the first video in this series, there's a large range of the amount of toms you can have on a drum kit. But usually, the largest amount you'll see written for is 4 toms. And that means 2 rack toms and 2 floor toms. So, if we're writing for 4 different toms, the highest pitch tom would go in the highest space on the staff. Then your medium tom would go on the line just below it. And then if you have 1 floor tom, that tom space is the second space up from the bottom of the staff. And if you have 2 floor toms, the second floor tom would be written right here on the line just below that one. So in this case, this would be a 6-piece drum kit, meaning 1 kick drum, 1 snare drum, and 1, 2, 3, 4 toms. So 6 pieces overall. Next, let's talk about the hi-hat. When played with your hands, the hi-hat is written as an X note head in the space just above the staff. Kind of like how, when played with your feet, the hi-hat is written as an X note head in the space just below the staff. There are some variations to the hi-hat, though. When you see a plus above the hi-hat, that means it's a closed hi-hat, with your foot putting all the pressure down on the pedal to keep the hi-hats closed. When you see a circle above the hi-hat, that means an open hi-hat. Next, let's talk about the ride cymbal. The ride cymbal is usually located on the line just below the hi-hat space, right there. However, depending on the notation software or the composer, sometimes the hi-hat and ride cymbal get switched, where the ride cymbal would be located in the space above the staff and the hi-hat would be located on this line. But usually, this is how it is, with the hi-hat in the space above the staff and the ride cymbal on the line just below it. Finally, we can talk about the crash cymbal. So there are 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, on the staff. However, the crash cymbal is notated on its own 6th line, right there. And that's called a ledger line. If you have multiple crash cymbals or effect cymbals, there'll usually be variations on this. So if you have a ledger line, an effect symbol could be just above that ledger line. Or if you have multiple effect symbols or multiple crash cymbals, they could be notated on multiple ledger lines. And there you have it. These are the general notation rules and note heads for the drum set. Just to recap, this would be the closed hi-hat because of the plus. This will be an open hi-hat because of the circle. This will be the ride cymbal. This will be the bass drum. This will be a hi-hat chick played with your foot. This will be a crash cymbal. This would be a normally struck snare drum. This would be a snare drum as a rim shot. This would be a snare drum as a cross stick. This would be an extra crash cymbal or an effect cymbal. And this would be another crash cymbal or another effect cymbal. And these over here would be the high tom, medium tom, low tom, and lower tom, or second floor tom. Finally, there's one more thing I'd like to mention about basic drum set notation, and that is the improvisation slash. Whenever you see large slashes going across the center of the staff like this, that means you get to play whatever you want there. This includes whatever cymbal you want to hit, whatever drum you want to hit, whatever rhythm you want to play, whatever. We'll talk more about these improv slashes in a later episode when we discuss drum fills, but for now, just know that these mean you get to play whatever you want in this bar. Now that we know the basics of drum set notation, let's take another look at our application etude. This time, make sure you really follow along with the sheet music and solidify that connection between what drums or what cymbals are connected to where the notes are on the staff. And that's going to do it for this episode in the Principles of Drum Set series. I'll see you next time, where we'll discuss how to develop basic limb independence on the drum set.